But let's quickly move on now to our top story. India and the United States have signed a critical defense pact, BECA. What does this mean? I have this report.
We visited the National War Memorial to honor the brave men and women of the Indian Armed Forces who have sacrificed for the world's largest democracy, including 20 that were killed by the PLA forces in the Galwan Valley. Our leaders and our citizens see with increasing clarity that the CCP is no friend to democracy, the rule of law, transparency, nor to freedom of navigation.
The threat posed by the Chinese Communist Party, the underlying theme is India and the US reaffirm their strategic relationship by signing the final foundational agreement, BECA, or the Basic Exchange and Cooperation Agreement, through which India will be able to access sensitive data from US satellites and sensors that can be used to hit targets in China or Pakistan.
It is great to be here in New Delhi.
Today's 2+2 talks in New Delhi established without a doubt the changing US priorities in South Asia, where Pakistan used to once be a primary ally, but has since turned to Beijing for weaponry after the US decision to stop military aid to Islamabad. Between 2010 and 2014, the US accounted for 30% of Pakistan's arms imports. In the same period, China accounted for 51%. Between 2015 and 2019, the US accounted for only 4.1%, while Beijing accounted for a whopping 73%.
Buried in the messaging today was mention of maritime domain awareness and the joint development of systems. It is believed that India and the US have also agreed to a highly sensitive agreement whereby India could get information on the movement of Chinese fleets on a real-time basis, a huge force multiplier in the Indian Ocean region which sees an active Chinese presence.
The performance of our relationship in the last few years has been exceptionally positive. There isn't one factor, there are two factors. One is called India, the other is called the United States of America. It's actually been very, very remarkable over the last 20 years, but I would say especially the last few years.
For India, an alliance with the US is a critical bulwark against a shared security threat, China. Vishnu Shom for NDTV.
Well, joining us now, a very special guest, somebody who's seen through a large amount of these foundational agreements between India and the United States, Navteej Sarna, the former Indian ambassador to the United States. Thanks, Ambassador Sarna, very much for being with us. In the past, there's always been a concern here in India that some of these foundational agreements impinge on our sovereignty. What was the process of give and take, the negotiation, which ensured that our interests were protected?
Well, thank you, Vishnu, for having me here. I think that's a very important aspect because, if you had asked me about 7-8 years ago that we would have the Comcasa, the LEMOA, and the BECA done by 2020, we would have all laughed at it because there was a lot of negative perception about these agreements. There was a lot of fear of loss of sovereignty. There was a fear of being tied down into an alliance. And I think as the overall relationship has expanded into an area of greater trust, and particularly the defense and security relationship has moved into a confident phase after the designation of India as major defense partner in 2016, the negotiation of these agreements has been easier and possible. And, they are all very detailed agreements. They are not simply, there are basic templates also, but then there are very specific issues which have been negotiated through the years, in which the negotiations have taken care of the concerns that either side may have about loss of control, loss of sovereign decision-making, leakage of technologies, leakage of information. These are the things that get negotiated in the process. And the greater the overall trust, the greater the convergence of objectives, the more possible this becomes. So in short, without getting into more details, I think that is what's happened with the signing of the last foundational agreement.
Ambassador, this is also obviously about deep trust between Washington and New Delhi. For America, it means sharing extremely sensitive technology, which they acquire from various organizations, from various parts of the US government, from various systems. How did that trust actually develop, and when did India realize that, look, this is really big for us, because the intelligence sharing which is happening, the information being disseminated to us at our request, is something which is critical, it is very valuable. When did that realization take place?
Well, it's a changing world, Vishnu, and it's been happening over the last 20 years, I would say, progressively. It started in the Clinton years, when, during the Kargil conflict. It moved on with the signing. A lot of understanding developed during the signing and the negotiations of the IndiaUS nuclear deal. And thereafter, in a world in which, we see geopolitical rivalries coming back, we see China assuming a more aggressive, a very muscular posture. There has been a convergence that here are two countries which can work together. Particularly, I would say that, frankly, there have been major gains during the Trump administration years, despite the differences that we may have had on trade and immigration. And particularly, although it was under President Obama's time that we became designated as major defense partner, but the teeth of being that relationship developed during the Trump administration, when we were granted, for instance, the strategic tier 1 authorization, which is the STA1, which gives you license-free access to a large number of technologies. And then when we signed one or two operational agreements, we began our exercises became more complex. And that developed a lot of trust. There was trust in the professionalism of our defense forces. There was trust in the ability to have interoperability between the two forces. And then there was this overall trust built into the relationship that when the United States frankly looked into this direction, there was no other country which was a democracy, which was a potentially, which was definitely a large market, which was potentially a fast-growing economy, which had a diaspora of increasing importance in the United States, and which had a convergence of values on regional threats, including from China and from terrorism. And all this put together makes us what is today called, a strategic partner. But this is it was a convergence of objectives, it was a convergence of needs,
Sure.
It was a commonality of values.
But Ambassador, let me ask you this. How would you respond to those who say that America always needed India as a buffer against China? Now India has no choice because of what's happening in Ladakh, and willy-nilly, because of what Beijing has done, their larger objective has been realized.
Well, Vishnu, quite bluntly, this is not about charity. Nobody is doing each other favors. Yes, there is a basic commonality of values and worldview which helps us move ahead, but there has to be a convergence of objectives. So yes, in the years when the US was making its openings to China during the Nixon-Kissinger years, we had a difficult time because our importance became less. And today, when the US is beginning to see China as threatening its supremacy in virtually every area, then certainly India's importance increases. These are facts of life. And I don't think we should stand on ceremony that, it should not be here. They should simply love us for what we are. At the same time, we too are taking advantage of this convergence. I mean, you've seen the statements today made in Hyderabad House by the Secretaries of State and Secretaries of Defense. Very strong statements on China, made on Indian soil, but not by Indian ministers. I think that's a strategic gain for our diplomacy today. So there is a convergence of objectives. There is a certain amount of using the situation by both sides. But then what's wrong with that? I mean, countries work on national interest.
Ambassador, where does that leave the United States and Pakistan?
Well, I think in the last few years, particularly in the Trump administration, Pakistan has been a bit left out in the cold. And there has been a clarity about the threats that Pakistan has been posing, particularly in terms of terrorism. There is always the the need to use Pakistan or to keep Pakistan mollified because of US interests essentially today in Afghanistan. And to that extent, we have to work with that. And Pakistan is always a moving target in Washington, D.C. Its importance increases for the United States when they need it and when the Pakistanis play ball. At the moment, I think Pakistan is being seen as a country which cannot be hyphenated with India in terms of US views. I mean, that's very clear. And Pakistan playing junior partner to China sort of solidifies that view.
So, Ambassador, final question to you. Where does India stand vis-a-vis America's closest allies? Now, they already say we are one of their closest allies, but then there are NATO allies as well. Is there still a qualitative difference between the strategic or the military relationship they enjoy with NATO and the military/strategic relationship they enjoy now with us?
Well, at one level, there is a difference, Vishnu, and I'm glad for that difference because you don't want, India is not a country which goes into alliances. So we are not an ally in the traditional or the treaty sense as NATO is. And therefore, we enjoy a kind of sui generis position. We are unique as a strategic partner. And I think that also is essential for our own strategic autonomy, for our own ability to make decisions, for our own ability to develop our relationships and sustain our long-standing relationships, say, with Russia and with other powers. We wouldn't like it any other way. So yes, we are not a treaty ally in that sense, but there are certain advantages to that. There's a flexibility to that. And in terms of military terms, I think we are getting very close to where, Israel doesn't have the STA-1 status that I mentioned to you about accessibility and clarity and clear authorization to access to technologies. So there are some things which even the allies don't get. At the same time, India could not be hammered as NATO allies were hammered by President Trump soon after he was elected on the amount they pay and so on and so forth.
Yeah, we aren't paying for this alliance.
There's a lot of advantage to that.
No, but Ambassador, the cynical view over here is that we are paying for the alliance. $20 billion of weapon sales in the last several years. Yes, our armed forces swear by them, but would you agree that underlying the broader strategic relationship is this American impulse to keep selling their weaponry to us? They announced it even today. Will India acquire drones or fighter aircraft? They brought it up on our soil, well within their rights. We've been talking about it, but isn't that something that underlies the equation? Well,
that is certainly is a factor. That there are commercial interests. There is a huge defense industry in the United States which wants to sell its wares, and until we can develop our own, or until we can move the relationship, as is clear from some of the statements made today and in the joint statement, that we would like to move this relationship more into the area of joint production, into the area of joint defense research. The DTTI has been a bit of a weak baby in this entire gamut of things. We would like to move the relationship there. For that, we need to show our capability and the ability to do this joint production.
Okay.
Until then, the sales aspect will be an important aspect, but then the diplomatic effort is to balance that with the advantage that you can get in technology transfer, with the advantages you can get in operationalizing things like the maritime domain awareness, the maritime security, BECA, and so on, which you have seen today. So every country is trying to sell its wares.
All right, Ambassador Sarna, great to speak to you. Very positive development one way or the other. Let's see what the future of this strategic equation, where it takes us. Thanks very much indeed, sir. I'm going to continue this discussion. Joining us now, Sheshadri Chari, Strategic Affairs expert, Vice Admiral Anup Singh, the former Commander-in-Chief of the Eastern Naval Command, and Shama Mohammed of the Congress Party. Admiral Singh, from a military standpoint, how does this work for us? How does this marine domain awareness, the signing of Becca, encrypted technology. How does that help the Indian Navy?
Well, Vishnu, it helps us in a very, very large and a significant measure, because you're aware that we had set up an establishment in Gurgaon, which has been open to many friendly countries for setting up liaison cells as well. And that's been long in the making insofar as maritime domain awareness is concerned. In addition, we have had wide shipping agreements. Now with Becca, the highest limit will be achieved insofar as exchange of information and weaning away wheat from the chaff. And that is what really counts for achieving true maritime security, as well as sharing information with friendly countries and particularly with the United States. So it will be a two-way game.
Seshadri Chari, in the past we've had concerns also with the United States. The fact of the matter is that they've had an incredible presence in Pakistan. That's been a huge problem for us. Belatedly, they want us to be more involved vis-a-vis China, because it is a fact that they need us as some sort of a buffer. Should we be as comfortable as it appears today for New Delhi to be so close to the United States? What about our non-alignment, which we've spoken about and valued so much in the past?
No, it's not the question of being non-aligned, or it's not the question of even being close to United States at the cost of our strategic autonomy. We have always dealt with United States on par as far as international relationships are concerned, as far as geopolitical concerns are concerned. When the United States was trying to cozy up to China, we were the first to warn them that it won't suit you, especially in the fact, given the fact that China was not very comfortable, US was not very comfortable with what China was doing in Hong Kong or Taiwan, or for that matter Xinjiang, or for that matter even in Tibet. But in spite of that, we were able to lead so many of our South Asian countries to on our side vis-a-vis China. We did not participate in the One Belt, One Road project, and we always resisted hyphenating India with Pakistan as far as US and China are concerned. But now, as far as Indo-Pacific is concerned, it's US which has lost out to China even more than what India has lost out. Not only that, if you see, there is a concern as far as Quad is concerned. Japan, Australia, US and India are all facing the same problem as far as South China Sea is concerned, and as far as Indian Ocean Rim Association countries are concerned. So it's not just the concern between US and India, it's a general feeling that we need to do much more as far as China's forays into Indian Ocean region and Indo-Pacific is concerned. So it is brought out of these situations, A. B, we should also not forget the fact that the National Security Agency of US was established in 1953. So their technological equipment, technological advancement has been much far better than what we could do probably as far as ISRO is concerned or NTRO is concerned. So now what we will have to do is we will have to brace up for working closely with between NTRO and National Security Agency of the
I
US.
take your point, sir. I just want to go
it's
across
not
to
the question of
right.
choosing.
I just want to go across to Shama Mohammed as well of the Congress Party. Shama, in the past when the UPA was in power, and perhaps rightly so, there were concerns about our sovereignty being infringed. Will there be American inspectors on Indian soil looking at at how we use weapons we purchase from America? Why will this eventually result in American bases being created in India? Do we want American boots on the ground in India for whatever purpose? Does the Congress now accept that this is a relationship that we need for all of the reasons which have been stated above, or do you still have your concerns?
No, I think the ambassador who spoke before said that we have a strategic alliance. Unlike we are not an alliance partner, but we have a strategic alliance so that we are independent of our choices, that we continue our relationship with Russia and the other countries which we have. And of course, I think this is a good thing which has happened today. We need to have this sort of deals with agreements with America when China is being a bully in this part of the world, like how it's in South China Sea and whatever. And also, Mr. Jaishankar has said a very important point. He said that the relationship started last 20 years ago. I mean, one of the most important thing in 2005, which we signed, was the new framework for defense cooperation. I mean, that was the first strategic defense agreement signed between India and the United States, and for the safety and security to fight terrorism and to see to it that there is no spread of weapons of mass destruction. We continued that in 2018 with the Indo-US civil nuclear deal. We continued with that. So we have had that, and also the ambassador mentioned the 2012 DTTI, which we need to further and strengthen it, because more of manufacturing of defense equipments in India rather than purchasing it, transfer of technology, that would be a very good thing for India. So I agree with what Mr. Sheshadri spoke about, as well as the ambassador, that we need to strengthen this. And but one thing is that when the American envoy spoke here, the Secretary of State as well as the Defense Secretary, is that they spoke against China, but I wish they also spoke against Pakistan, because anyway, now they have withdrawn troops from Afghanistan. They have signed a peace accord with Taliban this Feb. So if they have, we have the issue at the border with Pakistan where there is state-sponsored terrorism.
They should have done more in terms of speaking about Pakistan today. There were references, of course, to terrorism over there. Admiral, let me come back to you. How does it actually work for us out in the fleet of the Indian Navy operating in the Bay of Bengal or in the Arabian Sea, if there is the possibility of a real-time exchange of data from, say, the United States, from America? How does that qualitatively change your operations in your area or our area of interest?
Vishnu, I could make out a major part of your question relates to how will BECA assist in our operations.
Yes.
In our operations, is that right?
Yes.
Well, it will assist us immensely, because we will now have access to geospatial, which means geographic component coordinates, insofar as the entire picture is concerned. There are certain segments of our own space-based assets which are open to some friendly countries insofar as white shipping and various other vessels are concerned. But we will also have access to geospatial data of interest to us, and the connotations are very, very obvious.
The connotation, sir, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that we would get military-grade targeting information, right? That's what it is, Admiral Singh?
Well, one could say that.
Satellite imagery as well?
Well, yes. The basic idea was that.
And therefore, sir, just to, when Balakot took place, one of the things we didn't have, for a wide variety of reasons, were images, real-time images, satellite pictures, which perhaps could have been shared with others, broadcast, or even stayed with our establishment. With something like this, do you believe that we would have access to that quality imagery that we can use for any number of purposes?
Certainly, yes, I would think so. But certain conditions will obviously be the legal framework will attract certain conditions which will have to apply.
All right. I'd like to thank all of you very much for joining us, this program this evening. It's a big day. Those were the words of the U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. India and the United States in a relationship which is now far more advanced than what anybody would have thought 15, 20 years ago. 15, 20 years ago, when I started tracking this, there was a lot of reticence in New Delhi in how to deal with Washington. Look at where we are today. We're going to take a short break, come back with more.